Well, hello, and welcome to this week's episode of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John Blake.
And I'm Evan Grant.
And with less now than 2 weeks before the trade deadline, the Rangers and Mariners are separated by a half game in the American League West, with a big 4-game weekend series looming here in Arlington.
Yeah, the week has started out with a series of high highs and low lows against the White Sox, which kind of seems like every week for the Rangers. The teams came up on opposite ends of lopsided scores in the first two games, John.
Yeah, and then last night the White Sox won 4-2. The Rangers went 1 for 6 in runners in scoring position, and now the Rangers are 7-9, Evan, in the month of July. But they're in the exact same position they were when July started, with a half-game lead in the American League West.
Yeah, because there is nobody determined to create any separation in this division. And look, there are injury issues that are continuing to pile up for the Rangers. This week, it's Kyle Higashioka and Jose Corniel landing on the IL, though I'm not sure how much of a loss Corniel was, given the way he was pitching. Josh Young has missed 2 games with a calf injury. And I guess the most encouraging thing on the injury front is there is some degree of a plan for Corey Seager's return before the trade deadline.
And there are at least a couple of teams, other teams now in the American League, that are starting to make some noise. Of course, the Red Sox had won 15 in a row before losing the second game of their doubleheader against the Orioles on Wednesday night, and the Orioles have surged a little bit. And as we speak today, there are 6 teams in the American League with records of 500 or above, and they're all in the playoffs as of today.
Well, it seems like we discuss this every week, but let's turn to our guest this week. It's somebody I competed against for years on the Rangers beat, sometimes with grace, most times with lots of silence between the two of us, but he always seemed to inspire me to do my hardest work, and that's longtime Rangers beat man, T.R. Sullivan, who covered the team for 32 years, still longer than I have. First for the Star-Telegram in Fort Worth, and then for MLB.com. John, he's got a new book out called The Texas Rangers and Me, in which he recalls unforgettable moments and plenty of forgettable ones as well in his 32 years on the beat.
And it's going to be interesting to see if we can keep this conversation civil, and hopefully we can avoid too much confrontation, but it was. And we'll talk about how competitive the beat was during those years. And then on the Archives in Arlington, this is Hall of Fame weekend in Cooperstown, and there are acted 2 Rangers, former Rangers, I guess you'd say. Carlos Beltran and Andrew Jones are going to be enshrined in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, but we'll talk a little bit about our memories from various Hall of Fame inductions.
Right. And the segment that'll last about 2 minutes will go through every at-bat that they had for the Rangers. You can reach out to us on X with any Rangers questions or comments. I'm at Evan_P_Grant. And John is at Ranger Blake.
So, Evan, let's talk about it a little bit. Not a lot has changed. The Rangers went out and scored 10 runs on Tuesday night, put together a pretty good offensive performance, kept the line moving. And then on Wednesday night at Chicago, their bullpen is very good. But Anthony Kay pitched okay. Little pun there. Very little pun. But left-handed pitching, they have actually performed pretty well against that lately. But there's some cracks in the pitching right now, so you could take it from there. And where do you see this now? We're getting down to, when this episode lands, there'll be about 10 days, 11 days till the trading deadline. What do you make of it?
Well, the Rangers had an opportunity to create a little bit more of separation on Wednesday when Seattle lost again, and they weren't able to seize upon that again against the lefty, which should have been something that they do well. And look, it's hard. It's hard for me to believe the Rangers may win the American League West. They may win the American League West. It's hard for me right now to believe that they are the best team in the American. Let me rephrase it, John. The Rangers are in first place. It's hard for me right now to envision them as a first place caliber team. They are in first place because of default in the American League West because nobody has played very good. And you look at this team and sure, there are some possibilities that you see if Corey Seager gets back, but you also look at this pitching staff right now, and you lost on back-to-back days with Jacob deGrom and Nathan Eovaldi pitching against good teams. We saw Kumar Rocker have his best start of the year,
Yeah.
but he had 10 days of rest, and so his fastball was better. And that made his new splitter a little bit better, and we'll see if that can continue when he goes back to the regular 4 days of rest. The bullpen ahead of Jacob Latz and Jacob Junis remains something of an issue. I think obviously Tyler Alexander has pitched well against from the left-hand side, but you've still got that pack of rookies if you have to go into the middle innings. And now you've got a situation where neither of your opening day catchers is active. And it's entirely possible that both Kyle Higashioka and Danny Jansen could be done for the year. So do you need to go out and look at a catcher as well? So it's one of those moments for me. They've come out of the break, they've played 2-4 against a pair of good teams. And maybe if they win one or two other games, it changes your perspective. But right now, I'm on the glass half empty side rather than the glass half full, just because I see these issues that keep them from playing their best baseball.
And as you mentioned with the catching situation, Elias Diaz has done a remarkable job. Elias Diaz, but he's not. He's starting. You can tell there's some cracks starting. His offensive numbers have dipped. You're putting guys in very tough situations that have kind of carried you even to this record, to this point where you've got to get, and Chris Young has said this, you've got to get your best players on the field, or you've got to figure out how to create some reinforcements.
Yeah, I mean, let's go through this team just for a second and look at some guys. And you've got Cam Cauley has come up for 3 weeks and he has played very well up here. Justin Foscue appears to be a really good option against the left-handed pitching. But you get into these guys who have played every day. Zeke Duran has had a very good season, but he's going on 100 games now. And does he start to get overexposed or fatigued? Nicky Lopez is played regularly. Does he get to a point where he's a little bit fatigued or overexposed? The same thing with Elias Diaz. These are all questions that, maybe you'd feel a lot more comfortable about if you had Seager on the field and producing at Corey Seager career type thresholds. If you had more consistency again from Jake Berger, who has also gone into, one of his long time
bit of a tailspin.
Yep. So those are all questions that, like, when the team isn't playing well, you see the negative side or you see the flaws in all these guys' game.
Yeah. So let's talk about Jordan Montgomery a little bit, because I think that's pretty relevant right now. He did not pitch particularly well in his last start at Round Rock. He will get another start another rehab start. Has that been confirmed at this point? And then maybe try to slip into the rotation next week?
Yeah, he's going to pitch. As this drops on Friday, he's pitching tonight, I think, in Albuquerque. His other option was to pitch today, as we record this on Thursday, at 11 a.m., and I think the Rangers decided that would be better if he just pitched at night. The velocity is probably still a mile or so below what the Rangers would like to see. And Jordan talked about some things where he's, not trying consciously, but I think his body is trying to create a little extra velocity, and it lengthens his arm whip, and because of it, it kind of opens him up, and it makes his off-speed pitches, stay up in the zone, and he's not getting really much more command on the fastball. So they need to see a good start. They need to see Jordan go out there and really put up 5 solid innings from start to finish, where he maintains the velocity all the way through, where his mechanics are consistent. And Cody Bradford will also pitch on Friday. I think that he really had a good outing the last time out. I think the Rangers would like to get him a little bit deeper into games, but the possibility exists that Cody could come back. Right now they need another starter for depth. But I think if all goes well, at some point in time, you could have Cody come in and give you a really an extra left-handed arm out of the bullpen.
Okay, and let's talk about Corey Seager and his status as we're taping this. Seems is still a little murky, and is he going to need a rehab assignment at this point, or are they just going to try to drop him back in at some point?
No, I think he's going to go out on rehab next week, and he probably in a best case scenario, he's probably a factor only for that series in Houston that leads right up to the break. And I've got differing thoughts on how that goes. I mean, it either gives the Rangers a real push to say, okay, this is what we envision, or he's auditioning for other clubs, because I think the Rangers, come the deadline, they could very possibly entertain the possibility of trading Corey Seager.
Let's again talking about the trade deadline a little bit more. Rangers need right-handed relief, right? I mean, that's got to be a big priority here. Hopefully Montgomery can kind of stabilize at the back end of that rotation. What else do you see as possibilities?
I think, right-handed relief is the number one priority, maybe multiple right-handed relievers. I think the other thing, and look, Cam Cauley has played really well since he's come up. He's gotten much more comfortable in center field, and he's given the Rangers a right-handed option in center field. You also look at the situation the last 2 nights against lefties, and you had Alejandro Osuna having to play the outfield, and he's performed well against lefties. But I think in the perfect world, you don't want to put a 23-year-old lefty out there against lefties. So I think they would like another a veteran right-handed hitting outfielder who could play some center field in a perfect world. And I'm still not sure where they stand on the catching thing. I think the catching thing is probably a lower priority. But I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with Elias Diaz and Austin Wynns being my catchers the rest of the year. I think they're gonna at least at that point they would plumb the waiver and the DFA market. And former Ranger great Yohel Pozo is out there right now, DFA'd by St. Louis. I don't know if that's a guy who's gonna force the Rangers to make a move or not, but he does have minor league options, and he is a little bit younger than Wynns. And listen, I don't rule out the possibility if the Rangers aren't satisfied with Jordan Montgomery after this start, I don't rule out the possibility that if the Rangers think they're going to compete, that they wouldn't consider trying to pick up a starting pitcher.
Well, it's going to be interesting. A lot to unpack here in the next 2 weeks, and
but John, I think I think we're not telling the full story if we don't also acknowledge, look, what's the capital that the Rangers have to make for a trade? The farm system is thin right now. It just is. I mean, that's the bottom line. And if the Rangers aren't going to trade Sebastian Walcott or Caden Scarborough, which I do not believe, I believe both of those guys would be untouchable unless they were to get like a controllable long-term player, right?
You don't want to rent a player for those guys. That's for sure.
If you were to go into the market, say, and look at Keller's Shea Langoliers, who's on the market from Oakland,
right?
Maybe that's a guy, because catching is such a weak position around the league. Maybe that's a guy with multiple years of control. You would consider giving up one of those top 2 prospects, but outside of that, I don't see the Rangers doing that. And then the other part again is this: ownership did cut the payroll significantly this year.
Yes, they did.
The question is whether or not, Ray Davis is going to be willing to add on payroll for the final 2 months of the season. And this is why these games coming out of the break are so important. Yes, the Rangers were 5 games over 500 at the deadline last year and made some acquisitions. That's not going to happen again. This team needs to play well for the next 10 days and really play hot going into the deadline, be on a little bit of a roll, have a little bit of separation from the Mariners, which means taking 3 out of 4 this weekend, being really what the Rangers have to do. Because if you don't, you get 0 separation at the very best, right?
Right.
And then you're looking at having to go to Seattle late in the year, where you played terribly for the last 5 years, and have to win a series out there. So I think the Seattle series, it's the Rangers' opportunity to create some momentum going into another huge week on the road that ends with that 3-game series in Houston, and they need to play their best baseball. This is the time for them to do it.
Yeah, well, and Houston's only 2 out right now too, so it's an amazing situation, but we'll see what happens. Again, 10 days is an eternity before the trade deadline, so we'll see. But let's move on. Our guest on this week's podcast is T.R. Sullivan, who Ranger fans will remember was a Rangers beat writer for 32 years, 2 more than Evan currently has, for the Star-Telegram and MLB.com. And TR has a new book coming out chronicling his years covering the team, called The Texas Rangers and Me, a baseball writer's 32 years in Arlington. And we'll talk to TR next, hopefully civilly, with Evan and me. Well, our guest on this week's episode of SportsDay Rangers is an old friend, T.R. Sullivan, who covered the Rangers for 32 years. Evan's only got 30, folks. TR covered us for 32 years, from 1989 to 2020 for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and then the MLB.com. And he has a new book out called The Texas Rangers and Me. TR, welcome to our show.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Evan. Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, we're glad to have you here. We have lots of questions.
Yeah, we have lots of questions, and I'll start by just I've read the book. Evan, have you read the book?
I've read segments of the book here and there.
Okay, well, it's an incredible kind of compilation, and TR is a great baseball historian. He and I have a thing in common, and that was the 1967 Red Sox. It kind of piqued our interest in baseball. That was almost 60 years ago, believe it or not. Next year will be the 60th anniversary of the Impossible Dream. But TR has written this book, and it's a kind of a compilation of different players, events, and stories. And TR, what was the motivation for putting all this into a book finally?
Well, of course, everybody always wants to write a book, but it's very difficult to do. The funny thing was, after a year of retirement, I went to work for like 20 minutes for Barnes and Noble, and just to see if I like working at a bookstore. And the one thing I found in the baseball section, they were all Yankee books. I mean, you had Ball 4 and Derek Jeter and CC Sabathia. I said, come on, we got to be able to write a book about the Rangers. And I know Jim Reeves wrote one, and Eric Nadel, and Seasons in Hell too. But anyway, I just started writing and putting it all down. And Jeff Wilson put some of it on his website. And so finally I asked somebody, the book's pretty much done. How do I get this thing published? And a mutual friend of ours, Paul Rogers, said, try University of Nebraska Press. They're the ones who did Seasons in Hell. And he said they did a lot of baseball books. So I emailed Rob Taylor, and he said, yeah, it took like 5 days to get the whole thing ironed out, and we got it published. It was a lot easier than I thought, because University of Nebraska Press has been great. I mean, just basically, my memoirs are just my thoughts, what I remember about covering the Rangers.
We should point out the book has been released here just in the last couple of weeks, and we will have a book signing at Globe Life Field, looking at Friday, August 21st, which is the weekend that we are honoring the 1996 team. So we'll tie in very nicely.
TR, I'm curious, and not because I'll write a book someday. We know I can barely string two sentences together, but what kind of did you have to go back and do additional reporting, or did this? I know how much of a baseball historian you are, and it always amazed me the things that you could just thumb back through your mind on stuff that happened with the Rangers. Did you have to go back and do additional reporting on this, or was this all written basically from memory?
I did no reporting. I'm done reporting. It was
That's
just
not true, TR. You're on our high school staff right now.
well, yeah, I love it. Yes, I do cover high school football for the morning news, and I did write a front page story with you. I wrote a young man from Plano who swam the English Channel, which was a great story. Evan and I were side by side on the front page of the Dallas Morning News. I think John Blake thought he'd never see that. But I have access to some databases that allow me to go back and look at newspapers and of course MLB.com and my own stuff here. But yeah, it was pretty much basically the way I remembered it. Some things, I want to make sure I got all my facts right because I hate reading nonfiction books. And then I'm reading these, and John's nodding his head. Yes, you go back to these nonfiction books, you go, no, that was wrong. That's not what happened. That was basic fact. I mean, it's not like his opinion was wrong or the writer's memory was wrong. It was just basic facts that you can look up. So,
Anybody that read Bobby Valentine's book knows that. So
I didn't even realize Bobby Valentine wrote a book, but that see again, if it's about the Rangers, they didn't make it to Barnes and Noble here in Plano. So yeah, it was just basically Evan from what I remember. So if you say, well, I don't remember it that way, I perfectly understand.
No, I'm going to use it as an encyclopedia pretty much because I don't remember any of that stuff.
well, some
Yeah,
of it was before your time, Evan. So, but not a lot of it.
Some of it.
it's almost, it fits perfectly, John, because as you know, Phil Rogers wrote. I really like Phil Rogers' book, and I still have it. Uh, The Impossible takes a little longer, and that runs up right through the 1989 season.
Yep.
From 72 to 89. Then I start from basically 89 up until I retired. And I have a little bit about the World Series, but that was just basically I was not a part of that. So basically, it's almost like a sequel to Phil Rogers' great book. Um, you got two books right there, and of course you got Seasons in Hell, which that's a little different than Phil and our book.
No,
That's a little bit different.
Right.
That's the Mike Shropshire book from about the 73 to 75 Rangers, correct? That's right. That's the time frame. You agreed to.
Yep.
That's a good read, but Evan, but that's not the way the beat was when we covered it. That's not how we did the beat.
No, the Rangers were a little bit more legitimate, not a ton, but a little bit more legitimate by that point in time. The Shropshire book tells a story about Billy Martin's hiring and Whitey Herzog's firing and the 74 season, and then everything falling apart again in 75. And let's just put it this way, there was a lot of drinking by the reporters in that book.
Yes, there was. Of course, I was never accused of that. But just let's be honest. I mean, the Rangers for a lot were just chaos in the 70s and the early 80s. And that all changed first when they hired Mike Stone as the club president. That was a seminal moment in Rangers history. Number two was hiring John Blake. I mean, John Blake brought professionalism. Yes, you did, to the PR staff. We all love Bert Hawkins, but Bert Hawkins was basically a former writer who was just playing out the string. I mean, his idea of a press release was calling it Associated Press. He never called Jim Reeves or Randy Galloway. He said, if you guys want something, you better just watch the Associated Press or UPI. I mean, John brought professionalism. Mike Stone brought professionalism to the organization, and it just changed the whole organization. And then the next seminal moment was Tom Schieffer taking it to another step. And after that, well, we had some chaos after that. But anyway, go ahead.
That's going to be in my book.
Yeah, I can't wait for your book.
Let me ask you about a couple of things in the book, and I also want to talk about 1996, like I said. What are your favorite? Let's start with favorite players, and you cover a lot of them in the book. So that you talk about guys, and and the way you've written it, it's obvious, certain guys that you really enjoyed covering. Maybe not the greatest, it didn't have to be the greatest player in club history, but just name a few of the guys that you really had a pleasure covering over the years.
Well, Bobby early was Bobby Witt, Rusty Greer, Dean Palmer, and Michael Young. I know Evan and Michael Young had a great relationship, but I try to have a good relationship. Juan Gonzalez, Pudge, I tried to have a good relationship with everybody. There's some players who, if you ask me about them, I'll tell you about them. But in the end, Elvis Andrus, I just love Elvis Andrus. I mean, the guy played with joy, verve, just every day was a great day for him. Always had a smile on his face. He was always available to us. He never got down. Or the thing that I remember most, here's the thing I remember most about Elvis. Well, I remember a lot of things about Elvis, but one time, Ron Washington had to pull him out of a game. I think it was in Minnesota, Evan. You may remember that. He yanked him out of a game he wasn't hustling. He wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. And here he was, a young kid. I think he was a rookie, and he got pulled. And I hate to say this, but you always think of a young Latin player, and they get pulled from a game, or the manager comes down hard on them, and you think it's just going to jade them and turn them into bitter or something like that. And Elvis just said, "I was wrong. I should have done better." And he learned from it. And he learned from Michael Young. He learned from everybody. He just never had a bad day at the ballpark. And in the end, I just think Elvis Andrus, I just loved him. He was just a joy to be around. He's probably my favorite player.
The Elvis image that probably sticks with me most, TR, and I know you recall this, is after Game 5 in 2015 of the AL Division Series against Toronto, when the Rangers lost that series, and Elvis had a really bad seventh inning. And I mean, he, in a lot of ways, you could say he was the cause of that loss. And he came out to his locker. There were visibly tears in his eyes, and he answered every question. And for us in the media, and I want you to address this a little bit. I mean, we all have our favorite players to watch and what they do, and how much we appreciate the game. But reporters have a different perspective, I think. In some ways, it's like when guys open up and show you some vulnerability, when guys are honest with you, and like TR said, when they're just available because they respect the job you do. And I never respected Elvis more than that moment when he sat there and answered every question, literally with tears in his eyes, over a chance that was lost.
Yeah, I mean, I have great respect for that. I remember, guys like John Burkett and Rick Helling, and no matter what kind of game they had, they were at their locker after the game. I remember one time Burkett got knocked out in the first inning, and the game lasts 3.5 hours, and I don't even think his pitching that mattered, because it was decided late in the game. We walked into the locker room. There he was, just standing in his locker waiting for us. I mean, he'd been dressed probably for 2 hours, but yeah, to me, the big thing was I really didn't care about great quotes or funny quotes. If I got a great quote, I would use it. I just wanted a guy to answer my question. Just answer my question. That was with Michael Young. Michael Young I had it down in science. There wasn't a lot of chit chat. Michael, this is what I need. What do you think about this? Boom, 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 boom. Thank you, Michael. Elvis the same way. I don't need great quotes. I know what I'm going to write about. I know what happened. I just need someone to just sit there and say, "Okay, here's my question. Here's my answer. Great. Go back to work. See you later."
What about, let's talk a little about 96, and then I want to get into kind of the media situation at the time and everything. But I'm running, we're going to give the August Ranger magazine a plug here too, Evan. We're running
Sure,
an
anything
excerpt.
you need to do, John, to
Right.
promote the Texas Rangers brand. Do you want to
Right.
mention anything about Buzzer and how Buzzer is easily available?
Not
No?
really today, no.
Okay. All
But
right.
we're running an excerpt from TR's new book on Johnny Oates and because of 1996. What do you remember first about Johnny? Because you're writing again very, very passionate on Johnny Oates, and then about 1996.
And wait, before, I just want to preface this, like, I can't tell you the number of times that we would be in a manager's meeting or with a player. And just to give some context about TR's perspective on Johnny Oates, 10, 15 years after Johnny had left the Rangers, TR would still bring up, Johnny Oates would always say. I think you learned a heck of a lot about baseball from Johnny Oates. Maybe not. Maybe you knew everything about baseball by that point in time anyway.
Pretty much.
But Yeah, I just so John, whatever question you've got about Johnny and the '96 team, I just think people need to know that TR regularly cited how much Johnny kind of informed his perspective on the game.
Well, let me make one thing perfectly clear. And I covered 9 managers, and I got along great with all of them to varying degrees. But I respected all 9 of my managers because they were there for us every day, often twice a day. John Blake made sure they were there to talk to us. They never. Sometimes they talk way too much. Some of those managers wouldn't shut up when I'm like going, okay, we got enough. But Johnny was interesting. When we got Johnny, he'd been scarred by Peter Angelos, and he'd been scarred by the Baltimore media. And the Baltimore media, John knows them. I know him. You know him, Evan. They're great guys. They're great reporters. Ken Rosenthal, when he was with the Baltimore Sun, was fantastic. But Johnny came here with a lot of scars, and we had to fight through a lot of that. And I think a couple things happened. One, Tom Schieffer, I think, really was great for Johnny Oates because Johnny Oates was scarred by Peter Angelos. Tom Schieffer really made Johnny Oates feel special, feel wanted. He got him through that bad period where he had to leave the team because of his wife. So I think Mr. Schieffer really helped Johnny Oates a lot. And then another thing that happened, I wrote about this in the book. One day we're sitting in the manager's office, and Juan Gonzalez had an injury. We all remember Juan Gonzalez. He could come up, John, he'd come up with a minor injury and he'd be out of the lineup. And one day, he was out of the lineup, and George Reba, who's an absolutely professional television reporter, probably one of the best we've had here, he asked Johnny Oates, "Is this legitimate?" And Johnny Oates, I mean, we all knew Johnny Oates was a Christian and all this. He went off. Do you remember that, John?
Yes,
I
I
mean, there
do.
were
I
F
mean,
bombs.
I was as shocked as anybody.
I was like, it made Ron Washington look like a saint, or Kevin Kennedy look like a saint. And afterwards, I told Johnny, I had a heart to heart chat, or not a heart to heart, but I said, Johnny, that's the best thing anybody ever did was come to defense of Juan Gonzalez, because Kevin Kennedy wouldn't. Kevin Kennedy said, "Well, all I know is if the player says it, that's all I can do." Blah blah blah. Well, Johnny coming to defense of him like that, I think that really set the table for Johnny Oates and Juan Gonzalez to have a great relationship. Because Juan told me later that Johnny was the first guy to really come to his defense in situations like that. So I think that, and then another thing that was interesting, we're in Kansas City. This is 96 season. The team had got off that great start. And when we went to Kansas City, they'd lost like 6 out of 8, blah, 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 or something like that. And after a Friday night game, Johnny Oates blew up. He blew up and had a tantrum in the clubhouse and pretty much laid into his team. So after the game, we went in there, and we all knew when there was a team meeting, because you were in there 10 minutes later than normal. So we pretty much, Susan and I ascertained that Susan Slusser, the great San Francisco Chronicle baseball writer, was here for a year. We all knew that Johnny had a team meeting. And so we asked him about it, and Johnny was forthcoming. He pretty much told us in general terms, what the meeting was about. Because before that, Johnny Oates said, team meetings are none of your business. That's between me and my players. I'm not going to talk about it. But that night, he kind of opened up. And by doing that, I was able to go talk to players on the record, Dean Palmer, Will Clark, and guys, and say, what do you think about this meeting? So the next day, I went in and talked to Johnny. I said, Johnny, let me just tell you what happened yesterday. By you opening up and telling us what the team meeting was about, we could go up to the players on the record and ask for their opinion, instead of you saying nothing and me having to go in there and talk to players off the record and get my clubhouse sources and all this and all that stuff you don't like. By being open and honest, we were able to write an honest story, and it's no big deal. And I think Johnny learned from that too. So I think my whole point in this is Johnny, for the first couple of years, he transformed from being scarred in Baltimore to being more open and friendly and easier to work with. John, you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, Johnny was he would, the incident with George, I mean, Johnny would sometimes have an impulsive reaction, and then he would regret it almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing with Johnny, and he did that throughout. But I mean, I remember those years very fondly. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And the other thing I remember about 96, and you remember this, John, when Kevin Kennedy was manager, all those players were late to camp. Every year, Pudge would be late, Juan would be late, Canseco would be late, and I'd have to ask the same question, and Jerry Fraley probably had to as well. I'd go up to Pudge and say, "The manager wanted you here 3 days ago, and you're here today. How do you feel about that?" And I asked that to Canseco, to everybody. In '96, this was in Port Charlotte. Nobody got to Port Charlotte early. Nobody got to Port Charlotte early. But in '96, the thing I remembered was the day before reporting day, they were all in camp. Every player, Juan was there, Pudge was there, everybody was there at least a day or two early. And I remember Jerry Nairn telling me, "I've never seen this before in my career." And I think that really was the first indication to us that '96 was going to be different.
Well, and the other thing that's notable about '96 was it was the last year before Evan Grant joined the beat in 1997. So the Ranger beat, and TR talks about this in his story. When I came here, it was very evident. At that time, there were 3 newspapers who wanted to beat each other's brains in every day. I think it was one of the most competitive beats in Major League Baseball. I don't know how you guys if you guys agree with that. But talk a little bit, and this can be obviously both you and TR and Evan, talk a little bit about that dynamic and really how it worked on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I was a, like I said, baseball historian. I love baseball. I mean, I absolutely love baseball. I got the baseball beat, and I thought it'd be a sports writer, and I'd write Grantland Rice and all this stuff. Well, my first year there in '89, if you remember, John, and I know you do, Jim Reeves was covering the sale of the Rangers to
Bush Rose Group.
to
Yep.
Bush and everything, and Reva was winning the battle. Reva won that story. I don't want to knock Tracy Ringlesby or anybody else, but Reva was kicking butt on that story. Evan was just a twinkle in somebody's eye. But I remember one night we were about ready to break the story, and we were driving to dinner, and a guy, James Walker, was down there. He just on vacation, and he's talking about Revo, and he said, "Tracy's a great baseball writer, but Jim Reeves is a great reporter. And if I had to choose between the two, I want the great reporter." And that was a seminal moment for me in my career. When he said that, that just changed my whole thing. And for me, every day I went to that ballpark, it was all about news. I wasn't there to write, Grantland Rice. I mean, sometimes I wrote funny stories. I came up with some good stories. I remember when you guys had 4 players with the last name Z, and I wrote that story, and I really loved that story. But basically, I went to that job every day, looking to break a story and get news. And one of the things one of our credos was, whatever John Blake announces, unless it's big, whatever he announces, that has to be our second note in our notebook. We want to come up with something besides what John Blake.
Occasionally, I'd surprise you guys. It wasn't very often, though.
I mean, if it was
really
a real story, like I remember, Mitch Williams gets suspended one day, and then, we had to write that story. But we were always trying to find something different than what you announced. And I remember, believe it or not, Evan, there's no way you can remember this, but in 2000, when I came back from being the national writer and I was the #1 beat reporter, I remember early in camp, you wrote a lead note that said, "Matt Whiteside won't be ready for opening day." And it was just your lead note, and I was all upset about that. I said, and I remember that's the first time you beat me on a story when I was the #1 beat writer. I'll never forget it. You beat me on that story, and unfortunately, I remember the stories you beat me on more than anything. You and Fraley beat me on.
It's all right. I remember plenty that you beat me on. Keeps me up at night still.
It was different. Back then there was no internet. I remember I would walk out at 4:00 in the morning in my pajamas, no shoes on, and this is in December. It's freezing cold. Going out there, pick up the Dallas Morning News, wondering what Jerry Fraley wrote. I mean, I would look up the paper, and if you remember back then in the Morning News, John, they had that top banner tease. So I would look at that and I say, okay, nothing there on nothing there. I'm fine. Then I would open up the sports section. He's not on the cover. Then I would look down the left-hand column, and He's not there, so I'm good. But then I would flip through it, look and see baseball at the top of the paper. And if he didn't have anything, I'd go back to sleep and I'd sleep soundly for 4 or 5 hours. But here's the funny thing. Here's the funny thing. And I know this one day, Jerry Fraley's talking to Tom Grieve, and he comes up with some ridiculous fact about baseball. And Grieve goes, how do you know that? And he says, Jerry Fraley says, well, that's what happens when you're up till 4 o'clock in the morning reading the baseball encyclopedia. And when he said that, I said, this guy does the same thing I do. He was waiting up until the Fort Worth Star Telegram was on his doorstep.
Yeah, it's hard to explain to people what the dynamic was like. And when I came here in '97, I had been on the smallest paper of a Marlins beat that was very competitive between the Miami Herald and the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel. But everybody hung out. Um, Gordon Eads was on the beat for the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel, again, one of America's great baseball writers. And he knew how to keep everybody friendly and then go find his stories on his own. And so when I came here and the dynamic was so competitive, I immediately felt insecure, a feeling that probably permeates and drives me to this day. I remember TR and I went out to dinner in Oklahoma City after an exhibition game. I think that's when Will Clark banged his elbow and
Yeah.
late for the '97 season. And it was a nice dinner. But I also knew I've got a choice here. There's quote unquote in our lexicon, there were good guys and there were bad guys, and the bad guys were the competition. And so it was my choice. I was either going to have a close relationship with Jerry Fraley, who was kind of my mentor and a great reporter, or I was going to get along with TR and not learn anything from on my beat. So I had to make that decision. And listen, John, you can even speak to this, that this is how broken the beat was when I got here in '97. Johnny Oates did a session with the Star Telegram, and then he did a session with the Morning News. He didn't do one manager's briefing. He did separate ones.
Right, and we had to get away from that, as we got better, and and that started with Kennedy, Kevin Kennedy, in the previous regime. So, it was it was a
What
little.
was it like managing that, John? Seriously.
You just kind of do. You kind of learn to deal with the personalities, and again, Baltimore was nothing compared to here when I got here in the fall of '84, because in those days it was Galloway, Revo, Phil Rogers was the pup on that beat, and Timmy Kirk, but it was just, and you kind of learn to live with it. You try to do the best you can. And there were days that I know that neither paper at the time was very happy with me, and we'd get into it a little bit. To put it mildly, but you just kind of deal with it, and I think TR would agree with that. That's how we had to, that was the dynamic based on personalities.
Well,
and the managers understood that for the most, but we did have to get away from that as time went on, just because the team got better and everything.
The story that always.
The pressure's on, and it got worse. When it got worse was when after the internet and people started putting on their blogs. Well, Evan Grant was reporting this, or T.R. Sullivan reporting that, and it's one thing to go out on the curb at 4 o'clock in the morning and see what the opposing newspapers writing. But now you got people around the blog saying, "Well, Evan Grant broke this story," and you're like going, "No, he didn't. No, he didn't. I had that story too," or "No." Or, well, it's not that big of a deal, and it's just that drove. Then they had baseball trade rumors, that website, which I love those people because they're always very fair and they're very good. But God, guys learned to, and I'm as bad as anybody. Guys would sit there and publish a story, then they would email baseball trade rumors and send them the link. I think Gordon Eads was the first one who started that little thing there. Then I remember this was funny. I'm sitting in the clubhouse with John Blake and Surprise, and he tells me that they've released some minor league infield, and Ed Price was sitting next to me. I think he was working for Newark. So Ed Price is sitting next to me, and John says, "We've released," I can't even remember, the Petit, whatever that kid's name was, Petit. "We've released this guy." So Ed Price tweets it out. We got the Newark Star-Ledger, whatever help paper he was working for, announcing that the Rangers have tweeted this infielder. And I'm like going berserk. How
Gregorio
could John
Petit.
Blake do that?
Yep, Gregorio Petit. I remember.
And nobody cared about that. I mean, nobody cared about that.
The I can't let this conversation go. We got to wrap this up shortly, but I can't let this conversation go without as much tension as existed on the beat. And look, let's face facts. This conversation is more than TR and I spoke on occasion during an entire season. But I think we both respected the hell out of each other. I always thought that, like, in the manager sessions, TR brought such good questions that I had to be able to counter them, and it made me more prepared. And I felt very, I don't know that I realized that in the moment, but I certainly realize it now. But all of that said, in 2019, when Jerry Fraley passed away, and listen, Jerry and TR did not speak, just did not speak. And the Rangers were very gracious to host a memorial service at Globe Life Park. And a bunch of old baseball writers came in, guys who had known Fraley for forever, and all spoke. And baseball beats it again. In that point in time, you were part of one network or another, and this was the Fraley network. And out of nowhere, I still just remember TR walking from the back of the room when everybody was done speaking and going to the lectern and saying he wanted to say a few things. And I didn't know how this would go. But I was happy that he went up there to talk. And then he spoke really eloquently about just how much he learned covering a beat alongside Jerry Fraley. And it was a real eye-opener for me in that, look, we go to work and sometimes we act like we hate one another, but we do respect the job that everybody does, and guys who work hard and guys who are diligent in their reporting. And TR always was that on the beat. Jerry was always that on the beat. And I do think that Ranger fans have benefited from a long line of great baseball reporters in the market. And TR, I've told you this more than one time before. That little speech meant so much to me, and I think it meant a lot to everybody in that room. I don't know what pushed you to do that day, but it was really compelling.
Yeah, I know. I mean, look, this beat makes you so competitive. Look, John and I have had some bad moments together. There was one in Port Charlotte that I regret. We
Is
have.
that the one where you were hopping around on one foot in the parking lot, TR?
Oh God, that was round 2. Round 1 was upstairs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something I'm proud of, but there's so much pressure on us. John puts a lot of pressure on himself. John, that's what made him such a great PR guy. Was John wanted it to be great. I mean, John wanted to do a great job. I wanted to do a great job. And sometimes, I saw Revo and John Blake go after each other, and it's just the pressure gets you. And a lot of this pressure is just self-inflicted. It's like I used to tell you back in the dark ages, 2000 to 2003, when it was just as bad as it ever. 2000 to 2003 was the worst ever in the history of the Rangers, in my opinion. And I told you, it was like, I would say the African navies are getting ready to do battle, and you'd go, "What do you mean the African navies?" And I'd say, "Evan, we're fighting a war that nobody cares about. I mean, nobody was reading it. I mean, we're fighting about Justin Thompson getting called up, or this Kevin Grabowski getting released, or we're dealing with some of the worst human beings that ever wore a baseball uniform. And
Ruben Rivera getting signed.
John Rocker.
John Rocker.
Mickey Arabu was my favorite.
Oh, yeah, I remember we had to go to Puerto Rico to talk to John Rocker. Turned out to be great. I sat on the beach that night and just, it was wonderful. Then we went and had to run down Juan Gonzalez at the mall.
Exactly. So
that was a very productive trip. But
I appreciate you guys doing it. I remember I sent Eric down there to because he could speak Spanish, so he could.
I do remember we were stuck. For some reason, we were stuck in traffic on the way to, I think, Bayamon to go see Rocker.
No, we're
or
coming back.
coming
We're coming
back,
back.
and we're stuck in traffic, and TR was parched, and he just got out of the car and ran to one of the roadside beer stands to pick up like a half a dozen beers. And it was just
Yes.
it was just the typical, it was the prototypical TR moment for me.
Well, I wasn't driving.
That's true.
We were stuck
Right,
in traffic. What
exactly.
do they call those things? Like,
And we had
You're-
just dealt with John Rocker.
what do
Yeah.
they call those
So-
little
But
stores in New
anyway,
York?
unfortunately, we could go on all day here. But TR, we appreciate it. You appreciate the time. The book is The Texas Rangers and Me, a baseball writer's 32 years in Arlington. I assume I have a copy. It's in bookstores and you can get it through the University of Nebraska Press. It's a good read, like I said. And we will be doing a book signing out here next month. So, TR, we really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, always good to listen to Evan and TR Sullivan spar over the years. We could have talked for hours about different things and everything, but it was a very competitive beat. And, and the personalities really, and they made it. They made it more competitive, and they really, as a result, the Rangers got a lot better coverage.
Yeah, listen, and I hope listeners enjoyed it. Or found it interesting. It was definitely a weird dynamic, and there's a lot of stuff that over the years I regret, and a lot of stuff that I learned from. But covering the beat alongside TR, I think, made me a better reporter than I ever thought I would be.
Again, well, you think Evan needs 2 more years after this to tie TR for the record. He's the 30th year this year, so we'll see if he's still doing that. But let's go ahead. Let's move ahead to the archives in Arlington this week. And this weekend, of course, is the induction ceremonies in Cooperstown for the new members of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, the class of 2026, Jeff Kent of the Giants, and then 2 former Rangers, albeit very short period of time, Carlos Beltran and Andrew Jones, brings the number of Rangers in the Hall of Fame who wore a Ranger uniform as a player in a regular season game to 11. These 2 guys fall at the very end of that list. Andrew Jones played 82 games for the 2009 Rangers. Carlos Beltran played 52 games for the 2016 Rangers after being a trade deadline acquisition that was hopefully going to drive the Rangers to a long postseason run because of his postseason track record. It did not. He went 2 for 11 in the 3-game sweep to the Blue Jays.
And as far as we know, he stole no signs during his time with the Rangers. Okay?
Exactly. Although he did in his last year in the big leagues was the next year. That was the 2007 Houston Astros World Championship. So, Evan, just quickly, I mean, you were a big Braves fan, obviously, as a kid. What are your biggest Hall of Fame memories, would you say, on Hall of Famers?
John, I don't know that I'll ever have a greater Hall of Fame memory than going with Adrian Beltre when he got his private tour. And to watch Adrian look up at the Latins in baseball, and look up at a display that was dedicated to Juan Marichal, and just see how emotional he was about what Latin Americans in baseball meant. And then there's a video, and this is before the induction, right? So the background.
This was in January. This was right after the election, and we took a private plane up to Cooperstown the next day with him and Sandra, and
I was fortunate enough to go along.
Right, and that was. I agree with you. That was so memorable because Adrian would not talk about that. He didn't really want to deal with it. He didn't want to deal with it in December. And I said, Adrian, look at the tracker. I mean, in January, I said, Adrian, we got to get ready for this. And it was his family that said, look, you're going to be a shoo-in for this. He didn't want to deal with it.
It's because he's humble as a human. And so you go as you walk through the Hall of Fame, because the players that are there get this private tour. of the hall first, and there is this exhibit dedicated to Latin American baseball, and there's Marichal at the very outset of it. And as you walk through it, at the end, there's a like a film, and Beltre was already in that film, swinging from one knee, and I just watching him watch himself as part of the Hall of Fame. All of that was very, very moving, and Adrian was very accommodating. And TR talked about how he likes to write news. I love to write about people, and I love when people will give me some sense of who they are. And that day with Adrian was just a great, great experience. And then flash forward to the Hall of Fame, and selfishly, and he called out you, John, in his Hall of Fame speech, and he even mentioned me. And to be mentioned in a guy's Hall of Fame induction speech, that's as close as I'm ever getting to the Hall of Fame. But what Adrian did, much to the Hall's chagrin, I think, was he was going to stay very close to what he wanted to do, was to thank people who had an impact on his career along the way. I think the Hall wants more of a, how would you describe what the Hall wants in their speeches?
They want more of kind of a narrative, some stories. They just don't want a long thank you. They want some context on your career.
And listen, I think that as he told his story and thanked people, right? He did create the narrative of what his career was like, but he was not going to leave out people. Wasn't going to leave out Brandon Boyd, the
Right,
Rangers clubhouse
right.
manager. Wasn't going to leave out people who he felt touched him along the way. And so that was moving, and that was a great experience. Just being in Cooperstown, what I said after Adrian's induction was, I think it's impossible as a baseball fan to go to Cooperstown and be unhappy with anything, regardless of what the traffic is, regardless of how hot it is, regardless of anything that you experience. It is impossible to wipe the smile off of your face. The museum is fantastic. The ceremonies are fantastic. And when you get the inside view that you and I have gotten to a couple of these, it's overwhelming. So that's my memory. The other two very quick memories, John. First trip to the Hall of Fame was in 1994. My dad took me during a family reunion, and he took one picture inside the hall, and it was the cornerstone of Ebbets Field. And my dad grew up a Dodger fan. He
Right.
loved the Brooklyn Dodgers. Even when they left Brooklyn, he remained a Dodger fan. Throughout my life, my dad and I had this rivalry because the Braves and the Dodgers were in the National League West. And he was so proud to take that picture of me in front of that stone, that that image remains with me to this day. And then during I think during a later visit, it might have even been during Eric Nadell's induction in 2014, when he won the Broadcasters Award, there is uh, an artist who creates images of baseball players from baseball cards. And there was a large image of Phil Niekro, my favorite player growing up, all made out of Braves baseball cards. And I wanted my picture taken in front of that. So those are two things that really stand out to me, just in terms of personal memories. But how can you beat, getting the white glove tour with Adrian Beltre of the Hall of Fame? I don't think it'll ever get better than that.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate. I mean, and then obviously in the years the
Well,
Rangers
you
have
got the white glove tour with Honus Wagner, right?
yeah, exactly. Go back, Cap Anson, maybe, who knows? Um, the years the Rangers have been front and center, obviously, for me, have been the most 1999, when Nolan went in and we played in one of the final Hall of Fame games, I think, up there. 2014 with Eric was very memorable. 2017, obviously, with Pudge, first ballot Hall of Famer, and then 2024, because it was not only Adrian, but Jerry Fraley won the BBWA Lifetime Achievement Award, and those have been I've been to other inductions, a couple. It's great to go as a fan, but for me, as doing PR all these years, there was nothing better than going to Cooperstown and being able to have a party and invite former players and everything. Of all the stuff that I've done, I can't think of anything that's probably been more fun than doing Hall of Fame inductions, because it's just, you're right. It's hard to be mad. I'm sure I was mad a few times at those inductions when something didn't go right, but we had a bus issue in 24 that was a little rough. But anyway, it's really hard not to, if you're a baseball fan, it's really hard not to be the best experience you've ever been to.
Yeah, it's just it's a great place. It's great any time of year. We were there in the dead of January when there was snow all over the ground, and it was great. Um, and so, yeah, if you haven't been, go. Whether you go for an induction or just go for a trip. If you are a baseball fan, you need to make the pilgrimage to Cooperstown and just drink it all in.
Right, you really do. So that will do it for this week's episode. The Rangers start a really big series with the Seattle Mariners tonight. And Evan will be on the road next week when we're doing the show. He'll be in lovely Tampa, Florida, and then he'll make the drive across the Howard Franklin Bridge to beautiful Tropicana Field to see when the Rangers face the pretty good Tampa Bay Rays this year. So we'll see you all next week.